So it gives me pleasure to first introduce the three panelists, and then I'm going to have them come up and talk. The first one is Kate Fort, and she's a staff attorney and an adjunct professor for the Indigenous Law and Policy Center at Michigan State College of Law. She joined the center in 2005 as the Indigenous Law Fellow. She works on land claims and does Indian Child Welfare Act she's written about articles on. And she's also currently the feature editor for the Federal Bar Association Indian Law Section newsletter.
Good afternoon. I'm going to stay here because I'm spread out and comfortable here. I'd like to thank Gordon and Mary and Nick for inviting me. I'm honored to be here and to be speaking to everyone. And I'd like to take this minute because I don't get this opportunity very often. But I'd like to especially thank Matthew Fletcher and Winona Single, who are my friends and colleagues, and have been encouraging me and supporting me since literally the day we met. And I wouldn't be talking up here today if I didn't work with them. So thank you. I'm here to talk about some research I did that some people thought was interesting on the Indian Child Welfare Act. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the Indian Child Welfare Act because I think there's probably a base of knowledge in this room already, and then talk about the cases and the research that I did on the act. So the Indian Child Welfare Act, of course, is this law that was passed by the federal government, and it requires state governments and puts affirmative duties on state courts, requires state courts and affirmative duties on state courts in actions in cases that involve Indian children. And I'm using the phrase Indian children because that is the definition in the law, which is a child who is enrolled in a tribe or is eligible for enrollment in a tribe. So there's this whole host of protections that happens when the state court is faced with an Indian child. And I'm not going to talk about all of these issues because that's not what I've focused on, but two things about ICWA. One is it is entirely based on membership or citizenship. It doesn't kick in unless a court is faced with a case involving an Indian child, which, as I said, an enrolled citizen or eligible for enrollment. Second, one provision of the ICWA that I think is one of the most important provisions is the notice to tribes from the state when these cases come up. Because without this notice, of course, the tribe is unable to then exercise its rights under the act. And the tribes have a whole host of rights under the act as well. So regardless of whether a tribe intervenes or a tribe becomes involved in a case in state court involving an Indian child, there's the tribal rights that are necessary for notification, but there's also this question about determining who determines who is an Indian child for the purposes of ICWA. And that has been well litigated, and Zeke said it up here earlier, that's the tribe's job, right? That's the tribe's responsibility and its right to determine who its members are and who its children are. So that is another reason, besides triggering this host of protections that the tribe has, notifying the tribe is another reason, because the state court doesn't have the right to determine who is an Indian child. The tribe does. So Winona and I were talking, this was last February, about it's really hard to find statistics on ICWA and if it's working and what is being litigated and what are the issues. So I can't remember exactly why, but I took it upon myself to read a year's worth of ICWA cases. So these are cases from the Westlaw database, and they're cases that have been appealed, so they've been litigated. These aren't ones that just are dealt with, these aren't cases that are easily transferred to tribal court. These are not successful cases. These are unsuccessful cases because they're being appealed up into the state court system. So I actually read 13 months worth, and that's a total of 352 ICWA cases. And this is not something that would make anyone cheerful. So this is a depressing topic, and reading that many, it takes some hope. I mean, it takes a lot of energy. Of these cases, though, there's 352 of them. 290 of them are in California alone. So they're all over the country. I think I counted 30 states where these cases were happening, but a vast majority of them are in California. Also, a vast majority of them are these notice cases. So in this large pool, this nationwide pool, 240 of these cases are notice cases, which means the state court has determined that the notice that the social services or the state court provided to the tribes wasn't good enough. Either it wasn't provided at all, or I call it constructive non-notice. They're so bad that there's no way a tribe would be able to figure out if that child belongs to that tribe, because they mess up the notice. They put the grandmother's name in the grandfather's spot. They put them on the wrong side. They misspell the names, but they put the wrong birth dates. You take your pick. The state has figured out a way to mess up these forms. But then as I was reading all of these, this is how it ties into this conference, I started noticing a lot of these cases where parents were claiming to be Cherokee. And a lot of these cases were taking place in California. So I limited my search to the California cases, so those 290 out of 352 cases out of California. And I just decided to do a search and say, well, let's just look at all the cases that where the name, where the Cherokee, word Cherokee comes up. Is it really this many, or am I just misreading? So of those 290 California cases, 150 of them are Cherokee ICWA cases. Technically 148, 2 of them mention it. The next largest number under a tribal name that I was able to come up with was Blackfeet, which is 41. And a lot of those are the same cases. A lot of times the parent whose child is being removed will say they are Cherokee and Blackfeet or Cherokee and so you also have 33 Apache cases. Those are the top 3. There's nothing even close. Everything else is in the 10s, 5s, very low.